Today we're going to be comparing the Uppababy Cruz and the Uppababy Vista. These are the two strollers from Uppababy that they advertise as full-sized strollers, so they would be the main strollers that one would use. I feel that they use the word full-size a little bit loosely. I think they both have very specific weight and size classes, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Uppababy makes very high-quality strollers, but it is sort of oriented towards the US market. So that means that both have a certain emphasis on being easier to fold than a lot of other manufacturers, and a lot smaller when they fold, so they can be used in cars. And there's been a little bit less effort put on suspension because the terrain is a lot smoother usually in US use. Uppababy Vista is their flagship model, which I think is really cool because it's sort of my favorite class of stroller. It's like I call it the Cadillac type of stroller. So large, reversible seat, some terrain capability. And it's nice when you have that as your flagship model because the company tends to continue to develop their flagship model and not let it go. So they just get better and better over the years. The Cruz is a bit more specialized. It came out a bit later, and it's very urban focused. Both because it has a lot smaller wheels and because of its just general overall size, especially when folded. It's also about 2 to 3 kilos lighter than the Vista. Okay, a few notes on comfort and use on these two strollers before I get into the mechanical section. Both of these are very rigid and solid in the chassis. They're designed in very similar ways. So the construction here, the way everything is put together, is without a lot of points of articulation and with a lot of metal. And you will notice this, that it holds a very sturdy chassis and handle, especially the upper end of the stroller in both cases, over time in comparison to a lot of other models. Both fold in the same way. You can extend the handle here, and the folding down mechanism is here. Easy to fold, which is nice for you using them out there. And again, both pack to pretty decent sizes, respectively, considering this one's a bit larger, but they both pack pretty flat for putting in cars. Both of them sport large baskets underneath. The Vista in particular has this really oversized basket, takes up to 13 kilos, but that on the Cruz is quite nice as well. In general, the removal of textiles is easy if you need to wash them. All of the mechanisms on the strollers are very intuitive. I kind of expect that from higher priced strollers these days, to have very intuitive mechanisms, sort of like Apple products do in the technological arena. The Vista, a few notes on that in particular. When you're using it as a single stroller, I feel it's really excellent. It's top of the line in comparison to a lot of these other larger sorts of Cadillac type strollers like the Stolka Trails and what the Boo Buffalo was before, and a few others. When you're using it as a double stroller, I kind of feel it's just okay. I'm not a big fan of inline double strollers in general. I prefer the type that are 2 seats next to each other because it feels a little bit more robust and sturdy when you're driving it around. People tend to like the inline look if they are really concerned with doorways, I suppose, and stuff like that. But it does feel a little bit like you're driving a double-decker bus that could tip over. It doesn't feel like it has the same sort of sturdiness while driving when you use a double stroller. If you are planning on buying this to use it as a double stroller, the second note is that be aware of how you want your children seated, because there are specific abilities in relation to the different sorts of seats and bags and so on that you can put on it in relation to what goes above and what goes below. So just be in mind how you're going to use this. The Cruz, while it is very nice for its size, it is a very specialized size of stroller. So while the Vista is more multi-purpose, you'll get a certain amount of terrain capability. The Cruz is going to be very urban. So it's going to be very comfortable to use on city streets, in malls, this sort of stuff. But if you're planning on taking it out into parks, it's going to get pretty rattly pretty quick if the ground is uneven. Okay, mechanics, we're going to work our way top down. So just a few notes real quickly on the seat and the bag. They both have the same seat and bag. The bag, or the carry cot, I feel is a little bit small, although it looks nice and large on the Cruz. In general, for full-size strollers, I feel it's a little bit on the small end. It's not a big thing, but you do get larger, more luxurious carry cots on some other models. Again, though, this is the same for both of these, so it'll be this size. The seats, by contrast, is actually quite large, and it's quite adjustable. So you can adjust the footrest up and down, you can adjust the back into various positions. That's quite nice from a comfort angle, It does mean quite a few more mechanisms involved though. It has the wire system inside for adjusting the position of the seat, and it of course has the little hinges for adjusting the footrest. Both of those are things that can potentially break if misused. Okay, looking at the chassis themselves, so as I said already that the chassis are very sturdy from the midpoint up. The Vista in particular, because it has these larger additional struts, but it has a very nice fold mechanism with, again, not a lot of points of articulation and a lot of metal, so it's very solid. I would note though that again you have a lot of these internal wire systems. You actually have a double sort of a setup here because you have one that has to do with the adjustment of the handle and the second that has to do with the activation of the central mechanism. So these things, when they're functioning well, are quite smooth, are quite easy to use. If something goes wrong, which it can, then it's a little bit more effort to fix this sort of a setup because you have a lot of these internal complex sort of mechanisms running down the inside. Okay, looking at the back ends of these strollers, of course you notice that the wheels are a lot larger on the Vista, and as I said, that is going to affect terrain capability quite a lot. Also on the back ends are the brake systems. I feel that the Cruz brake system is a little bit better designed because it doesn't necessitate the long wire that runs through the central bar that you have on the Vista, which is kind of a pain if something goes wrong. The Vista also has this flip-flop friendly on-off system with the brake, and that means like you click it once to put it on, once to go off. That just necessitates a lot of excess plastic small mechanism pieces inside that can break. The Cruz, by contrast, is a little bit more robust. The whole bar, as you can see, bends as you do the brake system, and then the only point of connection is on the sides here, which is very small. So I would guess that you would have a lot less problems with that over time when you're dealing with that. I certainly haven't seen any problems with the brake system on the Cruz. Suspension-wise, both of these strollers are kind of lacking on the back end. There's no sort of dedicated suspension unit on either of these. I can understand it with the Cruz, which is a very urban-oriented model. I do feel that this is a minus on the Vista if you're planning on using it on terrain. What they talk about with suspension on the backside really has a lot more to do just with the wheels. There's not really any sort of inbuilt suspension element on the back end. Okay, looking at the front end, again, wheel size, same thing that I said on the back. Other than that, there is a little bit of suspension built into the front in the forks on both of these, but it's not that significant. The Cruz on the inside here has a very small setup such to protect the fork from damaging the inside of the housing mechanism. This is quite necessary on four-wheel models that have front swivel wheels, because if the axle starts to widen out the housing here, then you can develop a wobbly wheel sort of a situation, and there is a certain fail-safe built into this one in order to help prevent that. Although it does tend to wear down sometimes, and I have seen problems with people having the wobbly wheel situation here. On the Vista, you don't really have that built in between the bottom of the housing and the top plate of the fork. You do have a small like a pressure plate that pushes against the axle right above the locking pin inside here, the locking pin being the part that locks the axle into place. And that does help the axle not to move around so much, but really it's insufficient for a stroller this large when you would expect to be going over a bit of terrain. So again, there's this emphasis that even though this is a larger Cadillac type stroller, it's going to underperform other models of its weight and size class in relation to terrain on the market. Other than this, the only last note I'd say on the front end is that the mechanism for locking the front swivel wheels is a little bit simpler on the Cruz, which I like. It's just this little like button that you press down and it locks in. Just puts a peg right into the front of the swivel wheel here. That's a very simple system. Whereas on the Vista, they again went with this fancy on-off sort of a thing, and that does have a tendency to fail sometimes over time. There's a lot of stuff that has to line up properly. Otherwise, this button can get stuck when you're trying to lock on or off the swivel mechanism. So if you're looking for a daily use stroller and you've decided that you really like Uppababy, again, these are going to be the two models to choose from, and it's really going to come down to how you plan on using the stroller. So again, the Uppababy Vista, it is this Cadillac type stroller. It's a lot larger, it's a little bit heavier. It does fold down flat enough to fit into a car, but not a very small car. You are going to need a decent amount of baggage room to get it in, even though it folds relatively flat. But the advantages to having something that is a little bit terrain capable and has this kind of larger home-based sort of feel are certainly nothing to look down on. I would say it's most relevant actually if you don't tend to use a car that much, if you tend to use public transport or you plan on walking with it for extended periods of time. Certainly if you live outside of a city and you're dealing with a bit of terrain, this is really the only option between these two, because it does have those larger wheels and just a certain amount more terrain ability. In general, again, I think it performs very, very highly with the single seat. It does have that double seat option, which I guess is something to consider, especially if you're only going to use the two-seating situation for a limited amount of time. Then you can go back to the single seat, which is quite nice. In relation to the Cruz, so they call the Cruz a full-size stroller, but I kind of feel that the wheel size, in particular the back wheels, kind of prevents it from being considered in like the mid-size class. Mid-size class would include most strollers, so like the Chameleon, the Explorer, really most of the strollers out there on the market. The wheels are just simply a little too small, and it does not have enough suspension to really fit into that class. But if you look at it in like a little bit smaller class, so with the Baby Jogger Versa and the Stock Scoot, that sort of a class, then it actually performs really, really well, because it does have that really rigid, solid chassis. And it does, because it is meant to have the same sort of seat and bag as the Vista, you would then have kind of an oversized seat for that class. So if you live in a very urban environment, you live in New York City, and maybe you have a small car and you plan on going on a lot of flat streets and you want something that has to do with size and lightness, but at the same time is going to fold out and give you a nice base for your child while you're traveling around, a decent sized shopping basket and so on, then these are the sort of specific use situations that I would recommend putting the Cruz to. Both of them are very good strollers. Uppababy is a top of the line manufacturer, so I would recommend both, provided that you know how you're going to use your stroller. In any case, that was our comparison of these two models, and we hope that you found it interesting. If you did, we ask that you subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.